again tonight. Thanks for joining us, and thank you, Tanya, for remembering to hit the record button, which I had already forgotten to do. It's my pleasure to introduce you Lydia Kennedy, who will be leading us in an introduction to SafeZone this evening. I've worked with Lydia fairly closely in the last year. I've known Lydia for a few years. We're both part of the LGBTQ plus interest group, which is open, by the way, to students as well as faculty and staff. So if that is something you're interested in, please reach out to either Lydia or myself, and we can get you the information about that. Lydia is the Senior Director for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion here in the Health Sciences. Lydia Kennedy, Master's of Education, is the Senior Director for the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of Arizona Health Sciences, with a focus in increasing recruitment, engagement, retention, support, and promotion of those underrepresented in health professions. She and the UAHS OEDI team serve as a central resource supporting efforts of UAHS colleges, centers, and community partners to promote and support equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives for faculty, staff, students, and patients. These efforts have contributed to the College of Medicine, Tucson, receiving the prestigious 2019 Insight into Diversity Health Professions Higher Education Excellence in Diversity Award. Lydia has over 20 years of corporate senior human resources, diversity, and inclusion experience. She is also a former business owner, certified corporate trainer with Zenger, Miller, Achieve Global, and a certified mentor facilitator with the National Research Mentoring Network in Madison, UW-Madison. Lydia develops and facilitates new equity, diversity, and inclusion programs, workshops, and initiatives. In 2018-19, she collaborated with Banner University Medical Group to design and facilitate inclusive healthcare to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender patients to over 1,500 Banner Clinic, AZ Cancer Center, and call center personnel. Lydia developed campus-wide Outstanding Mentor Award for faculty, appointed and classified staff, held annually at U of A Visionary Leadership Award Ceremony. In 2019, she received U of A Award of Excellence. In 2020, she received the BNGAP Organizational Institutional Leadership Award on behalf of UAHS for recognizing a health-related organization, institution that has led activities to promote the development of health workforce responsive to the needs of LGBTQ communities. She co-founded UAHS LGBTQ plus interest group in 2016 and instituted the first Lavender graduation for UAH campus in 2021. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Lydia.
Thank you, Michael. And it's such a pleasure to be here with each and every one of you. And before we get started, with the Office of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, we always love to start with a land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the Tohono O'odham and Pasco Yaqui tribes. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. So what I'd like to do is just take a moment. If you'd like to take yourself off mute, we have a small enough group here. Please acknowledge any tribal affiliations that you would like to have recognized now. And if you're more comfortable, you can put it in the chat.
Jonathan Smith, I'm not affiliated with any particular tribe, but my wife works on the Native American reservation in sales for the Tohono O'odham people.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Appreciate you sharing. Okay, with that, we do have a jam-packed day, and Michael has been so gracious to allow me to be here with each and every one of you today. There is a disclaimer. This training is really a full 2-hour session that we pare down to about 40 minutes, so we can allow for a few minutes at the end for some questions. So I'll keep watch of the time because I know you're all busy individuals and with families and careers. And so I want to be mindful of that. In addition, Michael and I work closely together, and we did come up with an agreement that even though this is a taste, or if you will, of what this 2-hour session is, that the 2-hour session will be offered to you all in October, and then we offer it again another time in the spring that you can attend the full 2-hour session. So we really thank you for being here with us today. So our concentration is to understand why LGBTQ plus education is included in health education, healthcare, and list and describe LGBTQ health disparities. Equitable care begins with appropriate terminology, and we will have a glimpse of some of that terminology. Bear in mind, I apologize now up front that I may be going quick on some things, just because, again, this is a 2-hour session. So I will be doing essentially a brief overview today, where we would be deeper diving in our 2-hour session. Describe the terminology and concepts related to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender populations, and understand how health professionals can have an impact on health disparities, and describe best practices for health professionals to create a welcoming environment for LGBT patients. So for our 2-hour session, we have a welcome introductions and a group agreement. We have a heterosexual cisgender questionnaire, which we will do in full today. So that's always a good one. I love to start that out and set the tone. We will have some terms and definitions. I'll try to get through all of those if I can. We won't be doing the Coming Out Stars activity. It's a very powerful activity, but there is just not time for us to do that today. A look at health disparities and what we can do, you can do, and a wrap up. And if we have time, we'll hopefully get to watch a video that's about 8-10 minutes long, but we may not get to that video today. So just a heads up. So here are our agreements. We have permission to be imperfect with regards to homophobia, heterosexism, transphobia, cisgender privilege, right? If you're not familiar with some of those terms, we will review those terms in this training. We have permission to ask questions and to be present. And we have so many distractions, especially working at work or working at home. So we just asked for you to be present with us today in these 45 minutes. We have permission to not feel guilty, but also to take responsibility for what we can do now to make things better. And what that means is that we may recognize that maybe we've had an oops moment or aha moment, and it's okay. Like, you didn't know that information. This is an opportunity to be educated, to bring awareness, and to open those lenses to help you see things differently. We can trust that people are doing the best they can, and we are, right? So we grew up with experiences, we grew up with various family dynamics and information that was provided and passed down to us. And so we're doing the best that we can with our experiences and how we were brought up in many ways. So we will respect the privacy of others in the room and in this training. And what that means is that we want people to feel like they have psychological safety, that there is a brave and safe space, that people can feel like they can be very open and sharing of themselves and experiences. So we want to feel like that is possible here. But it is to stay here and in the privacy of this training, because what people share is not our information to share with others unless they give us permission. And I have a story I may have time to share with you all, and I was given permission from those folks to share those stories. So we will value all the voices in the room and respect confidentiality. Again, so important. People may share some very personal information, and again, that is meant to help educate us. We will lead by example. So one of the things I like to share is that, now that your lens will be heightened, now that you may observe and see things that maybe weren't aware of before, it is important that you now lead by example and make a change, make a difference. That this is a brave and safe space, and that what else can we do to add for this workshop that could also make it a brave, safe space and feel like it is a brave and safe zone for you. Anybody, you can put in the chat, you can put yourself off mute and share with us. Okay, so everybody feels good, like we're ready to go? Very nice. Okay, so what we start off with during this training, and I'm going to do this full activity, and there's a reason why we do it, is a heterosexual cisgender questionnaire. And I want you to answer the following questions honestly as possible to yourself. You may find some of the questions difficult or uncomfortable, but that's the whole point. Here we go. So what did you think caused your heterosexuality, and are you sure it's not a phase? When and how did you first decide you were heterosexual? What did your parents and friends say when you told them that you were heterosexual? If you've never slept with a person of the same sex, how do you know that you wouldn't prefer that? Bearing in mind the current divorce rate, why are there so few stable relationships between heterosexuals? There seem to be very few happy heterosexuals. Techniques have been developed that might enable you to change if you really want to. Have you considered conversion therapy? Your heterosexuality doesn't offend me as long as you don't try to force it or flaunt it. Why do straight people try to recruit others into their lifestyle? Why do heterosexuals put so much emphasis on sex? And a disproportionate majority of child molesters are heterosexual, 97%. Do you consider it wise to expose children to heterosexual teachers? When did you first realize that your gender identity matched the sex you were assigned at birth? Is finding a restroom a fearful experience for you because of your appearance? Have you ever had to think about which gendered restrooms to use in public or avoided using public restrooms completely because of your gender identity expression? Have you ever had issues with your government photo identification not matching your gender, name, or the way you look? Is it common for people to call you by the wrong name or use improper pronouns when referring to you? And if you passed away today, would your family dress you in accordance with your gender identity? Would they use the right name? In the event of an emergency, what are the odds that you'd be mistreated or denied medical care based on your gender? If arrested, would you have any concerns about who you would be assigned to share a cell with, and if your gender identity would be recognized? Did you have to spend tons of money on therapy only to be told something you already knew about your gender identity? So I'll take a few minutes here, and this is interactive now. This is a live group discussion. I want people to share with us, how do these questions make you feel? What were you thinking as I was reading them? What were some feelings that were coming up for you? So who would like to share?
This is Jonathan again, Lydia. I'll put my camera on just for a second. Yeah, I was just horrified because obviously this questionnaire is for heterosexuals, but these are questions obviously presented to people who are not heterosexual. And it has opened my eyes to the privilege that I have of never having to answer these questions.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Yes. Anybody else?
For me, when I hear those, and I've heard these questions before, but every time I hear them, there's just a reminder of how, I guess, the institutionalization of heterosexism in our world. And, I've been asked some of these questions, And it's just, it's kind of the water that I've been swimming in. So it's like really interesting to have the tables kind of turned and go, oh yeah, that really is like not really appropriate. That's not really, even for somebody who's experienced this, it's like, it's helped me to have a kind of a different perspective. And it always helps me too when I hear these questions presented that way.
Thank you, Michael. Yes. In the chat, it felt uncomfortable. I think it was interesting to think about how many things I've taken for granted in my life. Very interesting questionnaire. I appreciate it. I feel like most people who are heterosexual just assume the world only belongs to them, and that's the way it should. Shocked because I didn't know there were so many aspects that I never had to think about, especially the medical care question. And the reason we asked this is because in the medical industry, think about how many times a patient who is LGBTQ+ is asked these questions or feels like they have to disclose their sexual orientation, identity, right? Gender identity. Yes, Mario, happy to share. So how many times, does a person, by the time they come in through the front reception area, by the time they get to the back office with the nurse practitioner or the medical assistant, by the time they go for any type of testing, is this question asked of the LGBT community, or they feel like they have to share? In some cases they don't. And so that's the question that we have here, because how can you fully treat somebody if you're not treating the whole person, right? And that's what healthcare is about. That's what public health and all of these components is about, is filling environments that we can treat the whole person. And the point of this questionnaire is to have folks understand that we want you to be in the LGBT shoes during this training. We want you to wear the LGBTQ+ shoes, because this is what happens to the LGBTQ+ community regularly. And these questions are not uncommon, unfortunately, to the LGBTQ, and sometimes on a daily basis. And just imagine how uncomfortable you all felt today listening to me share those questions, right? And how impactful that was for you, and how that does have an impact to folks in the LGBT community. So another important component that we have is our intersectionality, the whole person, right? There is, sorry, my screen, I can't see. There is no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we do not live single issue lives. Audre Lorde. And it's important to recognize that we look at this work through intersectional lenses, right? We all have intersecting identities, dimensions of diversity, in which that comes privilege and oppression. Some of us identify as Latina, Latinx, and female, right? And I have felt oppression based on just those two intersectionalities, right? So intersectionality is an analytical framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. Examples of these aspects are gender, race, class, sexuality, religion, ability, physical appearance. And it's most important that we do not separate out these identities, but realize that our sexual and gender diverse patients come with intersecting identities that impact their lives in ways that afford us privilege or continue to oppress. And that is powerful. And when we get the opportunity to be in a 2-hour session, we will have a breakout group session where we can talk about that and deeper dive among that, because intersectionality plays a big part of who we are. This one happens to be with nursing, and I want you to do some homework. So when you do come to the next session, that's 2 hours, and share this with Michael and myself, I'd like to know if from the public health standpoint, is there a code of ethics in public health, right? This happens to come from the American Nurses Association. There's also a code of ethics with medical, right? In the medical field for medical providers. So what is the public health code of ethics? Is there one? The nurse-patient relationship as at the core of healthcare. Nurse practices Nurses practice with compassion and respect for human rights of all individuals, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, and/or expression. As expressed in nursing scope and standards of practice, nurses are expected to provide culturally congruent, competent, safe, and ethical care to all patients across all settings. Culturally congruent practice is also the application of evidence-informed nursing that is in agreement with the cultural values, beliefs, worldview, and practices of patients and other stakeholders. To demonstrate cultural congruence and safe practice, nurses must advocate for patient-centered treatment, equal access, equal services, and equal resources for all populations that may be adversely affected by bias or prejudice. Nurses have an ethical duty to honor and respect the identities, beliefs, values, decisions of all patients. I'm going to repeat that. Nurses have an ethical duty to honor and respect the identities, beliefs, values, decisions of all patients. And does that happen? No, it doesn't, because I'm going to share a story with you. So the story I have for you is one that I was given permission to share. And I was given permission to share because it is a powerful story and one that this patient wanted to be sure people heard it. And when I started the LGBTQ plus interest group, we started a speaker series. And part of that speaker series is we had this LGBTQ plus patient, cancer patient panel. And that cancer patient panel had good stories and bad stories. And unfortunately, this younger woman in her early 40s was diagnosed with cancer. And cancer is scary, right? Because cancer, even though it can be treatable, sometimes, unfortunately, the outcome is fatal and unfortunately impacts a person's health and life and families. So we had this person who was very bubbly, positive personality. She's young, she had young kids, and she went for intake. And when she went for intake here at the cancer center, the nurse asked her, "What is the name of your husband?" And the patient said, "Heather." And the nurse's demeanor changed. She went from smiling to like drooped down to like kind of gruff. It became uncomfortable. And the patient thought, well, maybe she's having an off day, not sure what's going on, kind of strange. So then she goes back again. And this time she sees the nurse at the desk and she waves to her and says, "Hi." Like I said, she's a very bubbly personality. The nurse turned her head. She's like this, turned her head. Nurse turned her head. And so she thinks, well, that's really weird. I'm not sure maybe she's, again, having an off day, right? You know, it's tough treating patients with cancer. Maybe it's tough work for the nurse. So again, we dismiss things, right? Dismiss people's behaviors, even though inside our intuition's saying something's not right. So then the patient comes back again and says, you know, "Nurse, something's not right. I'm not feeling well. I think I'm gonna faint. Something's wrong with me." And the nurse blows her off and says, "You know what, let's just do a quick oxygen check. You're fine. I think you're just having anxiety. You know, you just need to go home and rest." And then the patient collapses. So what ended up happening is after the patient collapsed, she had to have an emergency procedure. And the patient, along with the counselor, had requested the nurse to be removed from the care. Now, when we go into healthcare settings, and I used to work in healthcare directly. I was in a family practice early on when I was in high school, and then also worked for a physical therapy office. You know, we're in the business of healing, right? People come to healthcare facilities and settings, and to the doctor and to nurses, natural care practitioners, whoever, to be healed, right? Something's not right with me. I need healing. I need to feel better. That is the business of healing. When a patient comes in and they have cancer and it's their first experience, no matter how many experiences, they want to be there and know that their healthcare providers are advocating for them, right? And they're taking care of them and providing the best quality care for them. So did that happen in this situation, in this story? And remember, nurses have an ethical duty to honor and respect the identities, belief, values, decisions for all patients. Did that nurse do that for this patient? Absolutely not. Thank you, Jonathan. You're right. Absolutely not. And, you know, this patient is a mom. This is a person's mother. This is a person's sister. This person's wife, right? People care about this person. And to have a healthcare provider who took an oath, who has a code of ethics to treat all people with respect, no matter what their identities, beliefs, values, decisions, for all patients, was really an unfortunate experience. And this nurse was asked to be removed from her treatment plan, her case. But again, what I like to emphasize is that any type of healthcare environment that we're in or we operate, we have to make sure that we're in the business of healing, not in the business of hurting. And unfortunately, this nurse was in the business of hurting, whether she thought she was or not, because of whatever her beliefs were. She imposed that on this poor patient who had an unfortunate negative experience and a negative outcome in treatment. So that was a big impact. And this patient asked me to share this story because she ultimately, in the patient panel, unanimously said, Lydia, tell everyone who is interested in healthcare, who is going into health profession fields, we want to be treated like human beings. We want the best quality care and to be treated like human beings. Okay, so this one is really interesting. We call this the gender unicorn. And so some folks may get this a little confusing. So I have an activity. You can do this, and I can send the link to Michael for you all to do yourselves. So we all have been assigned a sex at birth. You know, they have gender revealing parties now. They do ultrasounds, right? And then when you're delivered, a doctor then says, you know, it's a boy, it's a girl, right? So, but then we have other intersex, because we have folks that, though they were assigned female at birth, may not identify as female as they get older. And then you have gender expression. So what is that? Like feminine, masculine, other? How do you express yourself? So I have a nice blouse on today with a nice blazer. So I identify as feminine, right? Female. Then we have gender identity, right? Female, woman, girl. I wear earrings, so that's part of gender expression. Male, man, boy, and other genders. So for me, you know, it's female, right? And then you have physically attracted to. So who is that? Is that a woman, man, other genders? And there may be folks that may be married. Like you may have a heterosexual man who's married to a woman, but maybe he's physically attracted to other men. We have men who have sex with men called MSM, and that is something that in the medical arena folks needed to be aware of, because they don't identify as being gay. Emotionally attracted to women, men, other gender. And so when we go out here, I'm going to share my screen with you all, because I have this other really cool interactive unicorn. So you could put your preferred name, whatever that happens to be. So mine is Lydia. You could put your pronouns, right? She, her. I put hers. Whoops. And yeah, okay. And gender identity, you know, female. Gender expression is feminine for me. And then sex assigned at birth is female. Physically attracted to, and then emotionally attracted to, right? So those are my identities, and that's how I identify. And so I will share this link with Michael so that you can also look at your gender unicorn and how this works. And it may change. So there are some days where, you know, maybe I'm emotionally attracted to men and I enjoy confiding in men. So those are some things to think about, that sometimes these are fluid and they change for others. Okay, so does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions on that?
Could you talk a little bit more about maybe gender identity, that there are more genders than that, and there's other ways of having a gender or not having a gender than just that?
Yeah, so there's different folks that identify or don't identify with gender at all. And so you have different types of pronouns like the Z's or theirs, they, their, them, right? And so that's what the other gender stands for. And again, it's like fluidity, right? We have just folks who don't identify with gender identity at all. And so that's when you have those different categories as well. Our society is pretty binary, in which it just mainly likes to see the world in male, female. When we go to restrooms, right, it's either you go to the women's or the men's restroom. And many folks and organizations have petitions so that they're all gender restrooms. And so anyone can go into the restroom. It's not identified as one particular gender for that restroom. And there's a fluidity, so people can go in and out. Maybe some days they feel more feminine, maybe they feel more male, or maybe they don't feel any of those things, and they identify as they. Does that help? Does anybody have any questions? Okay, so see time-wise. Okay, we got about 10 minutes. So here's a little more information on sexual orientation, is how a person characterizes their physical, emotional attractions to others. So it has 3 dimensions, right? You have identity. Do you consider yourself gay, lesbian, bisexual, straight, queer, something else? Behavior is what gender do you have sex with? And then attraction is what gender are you attracted to? And remember, I talked about, you can have a person who is married, identifies as straight, but then is having sex with men. A male who is married to a woman, but doesn't identify as gay, identifies as straight, but is having sex with men. So we can go into more detail when we do the 2-hour training, but in the interest of time, I'm gonna move on. So the T in LGBTQ is transgender. Transgender people have a gender identity that is different than their birth sex. So transgender women, male to female, transgender man, female to male, gender queer is gender fluid. And then we have cisgender is a term for people who are not transgender, gender in alignment with birth sex, so sex assigned at birth, and gender identity, right? Okay, so equitable care begins with appropriate terminology, and that's important for the power of language in healthcare. If you think about it, we have folks who do not share at all their identity, and their identity is silenced. And a lot of times it happens, and what we're finding and what the research is showing is that you'll have somebody who has been comfortable their entire life to be out and to share who they truly are with their sexual orientation. But then now that they're in the older age category and maybe they're in a nursing home, they've gone back into the closet, and they do not feel comfortable for fear of discrimination, for fear of abuse. And it is quite sad. And we did have one of the patients on our cancer patient panel who never shared or disclosed her sexual orientation until she was diagnosed with cancer in her 60s. And so therefore her whole body was not completely treated. Identify appropriate pronouns for individuals. We talked about that, the various ones. I identified with mine, feminine, she, her, hers, Aya. Language is varied in different age groups. You will have the younger generation now who actually uses the term queer and have taken that as the power back within that language, because early on, there was discrimination, and that terminology was used derogatory and to discriminate against other LGBTQ. And so the younger generation have taken and empowered that language. And you can ask individuals about how they describe themselves instead of using your own labels, definitions. That is always best as well. Okay, so as healthcare providers, colleagues, friends, what can you do? We have a few moments, so 10 minutes. What can you do? Could somebody share what are some things, and learning a little bit about terminology in these stories? What can you do?
You could ask people their preferred pronouns when you're starting to meet somebody for the first time.
Yes. Anybody else?
I was going to say you can offer your pronouns when you introduce yourself, which invites somebody to feel comfortable sharing their pronouns, perhaps comfortable.
Thank you. Yes, that's very inviting. That creates a more welcoming experience.
Also, to build on what Lauren was mentioning, as well as that last person whose name I didn't see pop up onto my screen, sorry, to offer assistance or support, help in any way, as far as if this person feels more comfortable with someone else talking about these things, as well as how to identify or address if they are not being treated or identified properly by others.
Thank you. I love the conversation. This is great. Anybody else?
I would suggest that we avoid heterosexual assumptions.
Yes, that's actually one of my slides. Exactly. Yes. Anybody else want to share?
I think it's also important to practice. I learned until very recently how to use pronouns.
Mhm.
I'm not an English native speaker, so it's always difficult to try to express myself in English, and even more when you have to incorporate like new knowledge to your brain. So I have a friend that asked me to refer as they, and we have been practicing in order to learn how to do it. So I think it's also important to recognize our limitations and just ask for help and practice.
That's great. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. So one of the things that's really important is we all wonder, right? Like, will my doctors treat me with respect? Respect patients' self-identities, use the patient's own terminology while not allowing those self-identities to stand in for good history taking, distinguish among sexual orientation, gender identity, sex development, sexual practices. Is important to have an understanding of the whole body, the whole patient, right? We want to see more of this. My healthcare providers treat me with respect and as human beings, right? And have the best possible outcome and care. So LGBT people have the same health concerns as general population, as well as some additional risk factors. We won't have time today to watch the video I was going to share with you, but that transgender patient comes in to see the doctor, and the doctor essentially says, well, I can't treat you. And the patient says, well, why? I'm just coming in here because I have a cough. So, you know, we have to be careful about that and how these biases, right, and these notions are being imposed upon others. Important to treat the whole person, not a collection of risk factors. And important to understand that LGBT life issues are similar, but also can present unique challenges. Coming out as LGBT, anybody here had that experience, right? And I went to a wonderful conference presentation online where the speaker talked about the importance of not really using coming out, but inviting you in. I'm inviting you in to know me. I'm inviting you in to know who I am and what a privilege and honor that is, and really recognizing that, because I think society has used the coming out phrase in a derogatory manner. I know when Ellen DeGeneres came out, it was like this huge thing, and it was like all in the media, and then she got fired. And then she was kind of blackballed for a while from getting into any roles. So we think about it how it's like a negative thing, and we hear stories about probably family friends, you all may have this experience where they're disowned, right? And how it's more of a beautiful experience and saying, I'm inviting you to know me. I'm inviting you to know who I am and the whole person that I am, and what that invitation means. And it's a personal invitation, right? Like, I'm trusting you and I am wanting you to know who I am. And what an honor and a privilege that is for someone to do that with you and think of it in that way. So relationships, marriage, long-term partnerships, children, reproduction, adoption, That's huge. We've adopted our daughter, and going through that whole experience can be difficult and challenging. Parenting in families, going to schools, what will people think? Adolescence, aging as well. I talked to you about that story already. Legal rights as parents, partners, can be challenging, and just recognizing that. So we talked about briefly coming out as LGBT. I'm going to skip through this really quick. And then these are the assumptions. So thank you, Jonathan. Yes. Avoiding assumptions. Don't assume all patients are heterosexual. Don't assume all patients use traditional labels. Don't assume sexual orientation is based on appearance. Don't assume sexual identity is based on behavior or partner's gender, and don't assume sexual behavior is based on sexual identity, and don't assume sexual behavior identity haven't changed since last visit. Remember, we talked about that spectrum, the gender unicorn, it's fluid, and so people may change. They may think, have the experience to where a provider says, okay, this is who this person is, this is who they sleep with, but then they come and then it's somebody different. Like, you can't just assume just based on that visit that it's the same. It will continue to be the same. Bisexual identity is only a phase, and then transgender patients might or might not be gay, bisexual, or lesbian, right? And it's important to ask open-ended questions, realize we all make assumptions, because we do make assumptions. And Amy Cutting Associates from Harvard, when their research and finding found that we all have biases, but when we are aware of what those biases are, we can reduce them. And those biases have an impact on the people around us, on us personally, and those we work with. So it's important that we learn to check our assumptions. So I'm going to end on this slide. So what will you commit to do now that you've had a little more information about our session here? What will you commit to do?
I will commit to be an advocate.
Thank you, Jonathan. What does that mean? How will you be an advocate?
I will be an advocate for the LGBTQ community so that they are getting equal treatment, and helping to reduce some of the devastating health disparities that occur in that community.
I appreciate that. Thank you for explaining. Use more gender neutral language in everyday conversation. Thank you, Vanessa. Anybody? Oh, I'm going to be thinking about those questions more as a parent, making sure my kids have a wider lens. Yes, for sure. I will commit to pay more attention to my assumptions and try to be more careful about the questions, about how much I know or understand, and assuming less. Very good, thank you. Who else would like to share? We have 1 minute left. Does anybody have any questions? So start recognizing my biases so I can change them and be a better ally. Wonderful. Any questions? I can take one question.
I do have a question. I saw that oath for nurses, and I know that nurses have a duty and responsibility, but how much training are physicians getting on this particular issue?
So I can only speak to our medical school. And I know it's 3 hours in their entire training. It's 3 hours of curriculum, and some may receive the SafeZone training. I know that it is a requirement for our medical students to have the SafeZone training. And then it's 3 hours of curriculum, right? That's it. And you imagine how many years of schooling that a medical professional goes to, and to have 3 hours. And I've been in different conferences and meetings where the BINGAP stands for Building Next Generation of Academic Physicians, and it has an LGBTQ+ focus, to where they really want to expand that to 6+ hours. And then the institutions and hospitals are also looking to add more training as people come and or provide orientation. So that they could get more knowledge, more information. And also when we did the LGBTQ plus inclusive healthcare trainings, it was beautiful because it became this positive domino effect to where they started looking at policies, procedures, creating an LGBTQ plus committee. They were instituting training, right? And still having that for all their staff and their faculty and physicians.
I don't want to hog up the time, but one quick question. Are we seeing that now move to, say, an evaluation process, say, for example, for residents? Because having 6 hours in class work is one thing, but then knowing that you're going to be evaluated is a whole different matter.
Well, I know that there's certain hospitals that do provide patient care evaluations, and even doctors' offices, and some of the insurances also take evaluation. But one thing we're looking at is SOGI data, right? Sexual orientation, gender identity data. And that still is not prevalent right now. That's something that we're looking to have on our campus so that folks can identify from faculty, staff, and student standpoint. So when we have Lavender graduation, like we're having tomorrow, we have folks who we can send emails to and invite them to Lavender graduation. Same thing with alumni for our UHS LGBT interest group. If they want to be a part of our interest group, students can be part of that. And we meet every Tuesday at noon. We just have a new co-chair, so we changed the date and time. So we welcome all that input. We have a national symposium in addition to awards and networking event. So we really want to identify the good that people are doing and award them for creating better curriculum, integrating more into classes, experiences, all of those things. So that's really important. We had one person who said, what are appropriate ways to ask someone's preferred pronouns when meeting for the first time? So what you do is you can identify, oh, I'm Lydia Kennedy. My pronouns are she, her, hers, Aya. You know, I put it, you can put it on your email address, and sometimes that'll help people feel more comfortable. And you can say, hi, I'm Lydia. These are my pronouns. Do you have pronouns? It's just simple like that if somebody's willing to share. But sometimes people don't have pronouns, and they don't want to use pronouns, just to be aware. But if you're with the LGBT community, many of us want to use our pronouns. And so that's a nice way to just to say it first. So that's what I had, Michael. I did that in 5:48.
Awesome job. Thank you so much for doing the condensed Reader Digest version of it. We really appreciate it. And yes, we're going to make sure to have a full-blown SafeZone training for October. So keep your eyes open for the announcement for that. It'll be open to faculty, staff, and students. And there's some really neat exercises, and there is some really cool videos that weren't part of today's presentation that really make for a very moving, very experiential presentation. So I really encourage you all, if you'd like this today, the full-blown training is really awesome and well worth the time. So thank you so much, Lydia, for joining us and giving a taste of that to us today.
Thank you so much, Michael. And I love the folks that are saying you opened my eyes just in this 48-minute session, which doesn't do it justice in any way. I'm glad that that did have an impact. And I really look forward to seeing you all in the 2-hour session that even has a bigger impact. So really looking forward to that. And I'm glad a lot of folks learned a lot just in the short 48 minutes. So thank you so much. And I go make a difference out there and a positive impact, especially in our health profession. So thank you all.
Bye, Lydia. And if the Master's of Science and doctoral students, the MS doctoral students want to hang